The moment Jonathan Carter stepped through the towering oak doors of his family's mansion in Charleston, South Carolina, he knew something was terribly wrong. The silence inside the grand estate was heavier than stone, broken only by the sharp, trembling sound of someone trying not to cry. As he followed the heartbreaking noise toward the library, his entire world shattered. His pregnant wife, Grace Morgan Carter, stood with tears streaming down her face, clutching her baby bump while an expensive suitcase lay at her feet. Across from her stood his own mother, Eleanor Carter, pointing toward the door with cold, unforgiving eyes, as though she were throwing away a stranger instead of the woman carrying her own grandchild. Jonathan froze for only a heartbeat before realizing that the family he had worked his whole life to protect had already begun falling apart behind his back. Before we continue, if you believe kindness is stronger than pride, families should always protect one another, and everyone deserves a second chance. Please like this video, leave a comment, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing emotional stories that remind us what truly matters in life. Jonathan had spent the previous 3 weeks traveling across California and Texas, negotiating a series of business acquisitions that promised to secure the future of Carter Industries for another generation. Every late-night phone call with Grace had filled him with excitement about becoming a father. She never complained, never admitted how lonely she felt inside the enormous mansion, and never hinted that every single day had become a battle against humiliation. Grace believed Jonathan already carried enough pressure on his shoulders. She wanted to protect him, even while silently enduring pain that no loving spouse should ever experience. Grace had grown up in Columbus, Ohio, raised by a widowed schoolteacher named Margaret Morgan. Their modest home never had luxury, but it overflowed with love, respect, and warmth. When Jonathan met Grace during a charity fundraiser in Chicago, he fell in love with her gentle heart long before learning anything else about her. To him, she represented everything wealth could never purchase: kindness, honesty, compassion, and quiet strength. His mother, however, saw something entirely different. Eleanor Carter believed the Carter family name belonged only beside old money and powerful bloodlines. She never forgave Jonathan for marrying someone she considered ordinary. Although she smiled politely during public appearances, behind closed doors, she constantly reminded Grace that she would never truly belong inside the Carter mansion. At first, the insults were subtle. Eleanor criticized Grace's clothing, her cooking, her manners, and even the way she arranged flowers in the dining room. When Grace became pregnant, Jonathan believed everything would finally change. Surely becoming a grandmother would soften Eleanor's heart. Instead, her resentment only deepened. She insisted Grace wasn't capable of raising a Carter heir. She questioned every doctor's appointment, every parenting decision, every meal Grace ate. She hired additional house staff, not to help Grace, but to secretly report everything she did throughout the day. Grace stayed silent because she hoped love would eventually win. Unfortunately, silence often becomes permission for cruelty. During Jonathan's trip, Eleanor decided the time had come to remove Grace permanently. She fabricated stories claiming Grace was wasting family money and embarrassing the Carter reputation. She ordered servants to pack Grace's belongings and informed everyone that Jonathan had privately agreed his wife should leave before the baby arrived. The loyal employees knew it was a lie, but Eleanor ruled the mansion with fear. No one dared challenge her. When Jonathan entered the library that afternoon, he saw the evidence with his own eyes. Grace's favorite books had been thrown into boxes. Family photographs had already been removed from the shelves. The nursery they had spent months preparing had been locked. Grace looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally. The woman who had once filled every room with warmth now looked like someone slowly disappearing. Jonathan walked toward her without saying a word. He gently lifted the suitcase from the floor, placed it aside, and wrapped both arms around his trembling wife. She finally broke down completely, crying into his shoulder with the relief of someone who no longer had to pretend to be strong. Only then did Jonathan turn toward his mother. For the first time in his life, he looked at Eleanor not as the powerful woman who raised him, but as someone capable of causing unimaginable pain. He calmly asked every employee to remain exactly where they were. Nobody moved. Jonathan believed the truth deserved witnesses. He requested that the security director bring recordings from every hallway camera covering the previous month. Eleanor laughed confidently. She believed cameras could never capture words. She forgot that cruelty always leaves traces. The footage showed servants repeatedly carrying Grace's belongings from room to room under Eleanor's orders. It showed Grace locked outside the nursery while crying quietly. It showed Eleanor removing photographs from walls and instructing staff to prepare the guest room instead. More importantly, Jonathan asked every employee one simple question. Tell the truth. One after another, servants who had remained silent for years finally spoke. The elderly housekeeper admitted Eleanor frequently insulted Grace when Jonathan traveled. The chef confessed Grace often skipped meals after being publicly humiliated. The gardener revealed he had seen Grace sitting alone outside nearly every evening, crying beside the fountain because she didn't want anyone inside the mansion hearing her. Even Eleanor's longtime personal assistant could no longer stay silent. She revealed every cruel instruction she had been ordered to carry out. As each confession filled the room, Eleanor's confidence slowly disappeared. Grace stood quietly, tears still falling, not because she wanted revenge, but because someone finally believed her. Jonathan realized his greatest failure wasn't choosing the wrong wife. It was assuming the people he loved would automatically love one another. That assumption had nearly cost him his family. He gently held Grace's hands before kneeling in front of her growing baby bump. He apologized, not because he had intentionally hurt her, but because he had unknowingly allowed her to suffer alone. Grace placed one hand on his face. In that single moment, forgiveness became stronger than anger. Jonathan then stood and made the hardest decision of his life. He informed Eleanor that effective immediately, she would no longer live inside Carter Mansion. The estate belonged to him. Its peace belonged to his wife. Its future belonged to their child. He arranged a beautiful waterfront home nearby where Eleanor would have every comfort she needed, but she would never again control the atmosphere inside his family's home. Eleanor stared in disbelief. For decades, she believed money created authority. That afternoon, she discovered something greater. Love creates family. Power never can. Weeks passed. The mansion slowly transformed. Laughter returned. The nursery reopened. Fresh flowers filled every hallway. Grace began smiling again. Jonathan adjusted his schedule, refusing to spend weeks away unless absolutely necessary. Business success suddenly meant very little compared to breakfast with his wife or feeling his unborn child kick beneath his hand each evening. Several months later, during the first snowfall of winter, Grace gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Abigail. When Jonathan held his daughter for the first time, tears streamed freely down his face. He silently promised her something his father had never promised him. No amount of success would ever come before family. News of Abigail's birth eventually reached Eleanor. For several days, she debated visiting. Pride argued against it. Loneliness argued otherwise. Finally, carrying nothing more than a small knitted blanket she had made herself, Eleanor arrived quietly at the hospital. She looked older, smaller. The confidence that once intimidated everyone had been replaced by regret. Jonathan saw her standing outside the room. He remembered every painful memory. Then he remembered the future, not the past. Grace noticed Eleanor through the doorway. Instead of responding with bitterness, she simply nodded. An invitation. Not because the past had disappeared, but because healing must begin somewhere. Eleanor entered slowly and looked at her granddaughter sleeping peacefully. For the first time in many years, she cried without trying to hide it. She admitted she had confused protecting a family name with protecting a family itself. She asked Grace for forgiveness, expecting rejection. Grace surprised everyone. She explained forgiveness didn't erase scars. It simply prevented new ones from forming. Over the following months, Eleanor slowly earned back trust, not through expensive gifts or dramatic speeches, but through consistent acts of humility. She visited only when invited. She respected boundaries. She apologized whenever old habits resurfaced. Most importantly, she became the grandmother Abigail deserved instead of the woman pride had once created. Years later, Abigail would grow up surrounded not by stories of revenge, but by stories of redemption. She learned that strength wasn't measured by winning arguments. It was measured by protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. She learned that wealth meant little without compassion. She learned that forgiveness required greater courage than resentment. And every anniversary of that painful afternoon, Jonathan and Grace would quietly stand together in the nursery, where everything had nearly been lost. Instead of remembering humiliation, they remembered survival. Instead of remembering betrayal, they celebrated healing. Instead of remembering brokenness, they thanked God for giving them the opportunity to rebuild what truly mattered. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to comment with the words, "Love protects family." We'd love to know where you're watching from and what lesson this story meant to you. In a world where pride often speaks louder than compassion, may we always choose the courage to defend those we love, the wisdom to admit when we are wrong, and the grace to forgive when healing seems impossible. Because the strongest families are not the ones that never face storms. They are the ones that refuse to let those storms tear them apart. If this emotional story moved you, please like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, share it with someone who believes in forgiveness, and subscribe for more inspiring stories that remind us that love, kindness, and courage will always be stronger than hate.